Judy.
Hi, Dan.
Oh, I'm so happy that you are here with me, that I'm here with you, because you've been...
This is my favorite man right here.
This is one of my favorite people on planet Earth. Well, you just finished up a teaching stint, a fairly big one at UC Davis.
I did.
And before that, you were away across the pond, as they say.
Yes.
Because you are a newlywed with another fabulous musician and teacher and the world's foremost scholar of Woody Guthrie music. But today is all about you. You've had such a long and established theater career. I don't even know if it pays to get into it, but suffice to say that I was going through some theater books, and one of the texts to teach musical theater I'm looking at, and like, that's Judy on the cover, and you know, of course, it was a picture from LOVEMUSIK, and I know that you've had a long association with Kurt Weill. You were on the panel to judge, you know, the competition,
the Ladi Lenya competition twice. Yeah, I loved that.
And you know, there's so many facets of your career, but I think because of where you are today and where you will be in the future, let's kind of talk about your teaching. I've played for several of your private coachings and some master classes, and a lot of times you take your technique and your exercises back to your father.
My daddy, Walter Blazer, he was an interesting man. He had come from Brooklyn, of a immigrant Jewish family, and he was very interested in music and studied with a woman from Vienna named Madame Zada. Just the name alone. My Aunt Ruth, who's 94, still talks about her. And he went to Juilliard for a year. And then the war, you know, everybody was joining up. And he did. He became a lieutenant. And my father was stationed with an Englishman in the south of Italy, where my mother was a pianist, was starting a career as a singer, and had her own radio show especially for English soldiers that were stationed in Italy. So they got connected. After the war, he went back to Italy. My mother was living in Rome. She was a staple singer for La Rai, which is now the television, but it was radio at the time.
Okay.
And they were married in the synagogue in Rome, and they came to America in 1951 with my brethren here. Mm-hmm. And my father continued singing at what was then called Philharmonic Hall, which became Avery Fisher. And he sang there, and Carnegie Hall, did a lot of oratorio, began teaching, headed a radio station in New Jersey, taught opera classes and had opera workshops, and then eventually ended up on the faculty of Manhattan School of Music. And that's where I chose to go to school.
Yeah. To
study with my dad. So it was very eclectic, and I grew up in an Italian Jewish household, and my mother had been a renowned singer in Italy, and
did she also teach when she moved back to the States?
She did. In fact, she left her career behind. She played for his lessons, she coached, played for opera workshops, played in all the schools. In Montclair High School, my mother was known as Mamma Mia. They did a lot of musical projects in Montclair, and my brother and I were raised as instrumentalists. He was a cellist, I was a violinist. But I loved the theater. I remember talking to them and saying I wanted to be an actress. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, you'll have to read a great deal. And I was not a good reader, still not a good reader, sad to say. And I thought, well, I've got this musical background, and so instead I decided to audition for a music school where my dad was teaching. And the acting kind of got brushed aside. But I thought if I was in operas, I would at least get to be characters. Mm-hmm. And I did. And then I went and lived in Italy for quite a while, and toured Italy and lived in Florence and did some really interesting operas and obscure pieces there. And then I came back to the States and continued doing some opera, but I was a very light voice. So I had a boyfriend at the time who was auditioning with Backstage, the trade papers that came out that you'd buy, and it would have the breakdowns in them. And he said, look, we're used to singing 5 arias back to back. All you have to do is 16 bars of a song in the audition. And I did audition. I did get jobs. I eventually got the Fantasticks, and that's how I got my equity card on Sullivan Street. But you know, the acting and the catching up of that and the dance. And then I ended up in television for several years on a daytime show. No experience. It was always baptism by fire. And then finally made my Broadway debut many years later after doing a lot of regional theater in Me and My Girl, and that was a tap show, and I had to tap dance, and I'd never had a tap shoe on before. It was very bizarre. I was an eclectic career, and I did get to act, and I did get to do a lot of plays, and I did a little more TV and concert work, but I found that they're quick to peg you in any profession. America's such a huge country, and there are so many people vying for positions. It's so competitive that they want to compartmentalize and put everybody in a slot. So as soon as I switched from being a coloratura soprano to a belter, I said, oh, well, we can't hire her for this role. She's just a belter now. She doesn't sing soprano anymore. What made you think that I disowned completely my soprano voice? It's like saying, I'm just going to write these cousins off and hang out with these cousins. I felt that often I had to prove to them that I had a vast interest in the arts and in many different branches of, I was lucky. I got to do Neil Simon's last play on Broadway. And now, here I am like living in England, and I keep coming back to the States to work because this is where the work is, and I love teaching, and I love directing, and I love passing it on, and I like doing it all, but I really, I think now I like the teaching best.
Having your eclectic background has made you so valuable as a teacher, because the students who come to you come from so many different places with so many different places to go, and the fabric of musical theater today is not only, bridging the gap between opera and golden age, but now it's golden age and rock and pop, and golden age and reimagined golden age. What's your philosophy on preparing students for some of these more classic pieces that are being reinterpreted and being breathed new life?
Well, I think that's a great question and a substantial one. I think that we are fortunate in this age to have one very important device, and that's Google. The extensive research that can be done if you're doing a revival of something to find out what the origins were and why the piece was written and the time in which it was written and who wrote it and what was their career and when in their career was it written and who played it originally and what was happening socio-politically at the time. So how could the piece be delivered at that time? What was the awareness? I do think it is essential for people in musical theater to study the Golden Age. If I were a theater major, you're not going to bypass Shakespeare. When I studied classical singing, you had your years of languages, and the first year was Italian. Lucky me, that was my first language. I got exempt. I think it's the same in musical theater. Yes, Rent is a period show by today's numbers, but I think to sing pop rock is not enough.
Yeah, well, it's so hard because any art form is a cumulative enterprise. You just because new things are written, you can't ignore what has done before it. And the interesting thing is when you take a look at something like history, you can categorize earlier things by 50 years or 100 years. And now trends are changing so quickly and so rapidly that, when people are preparing, a pop song, like, well, a 1970s pop song is so much different than a 1990s pop song, which is so much different than like a 2 years later and 1 year later and 1 week later. Whereas people lump all of the golden age together. A lot of the times you need to step back and realize that all singing comes from a place of discipline. You're building the basics and you're becoming aware of what your voice is doing and how it works and how you can use it. If you really build up your instrument, you'll be able to do any number of things. But if you only, it's like jazz. If you only learn one jazz lick, you might be able to do that really well, but it's not transferable in the other direction.
Totally. And I think the biggest misconception is that one thing is style and one thing is technique. Mm-hmm. People confuse vocal technique with stylistic diversity. I say this ad nauseum perhaps when I teach or lecture, but when you look at singing, what it is to be a singer. For me, it was first and foremost to be a musician, because that's how I arrived at singing. Yeah. And then the next part from the music and the vocal technique is the acting. Any violinist will tell you, or any instrumentalist will tell you, that you're acting when you play a piece of music. You're interpreting it. There's an emotional subtext. It may not be words, but there is a structure that causes you to visit it that way when you're playing it. But when you have a text, and you're telling a story, and you're a character, then you're an actor. So each song might be an entire vignette or an entire one-act play if it's Schubert. Same thing if you're doing cabaret or if you're auditioning. And then, of course, when you're in a piece, you've got to be able to sing well 8 times a week over a potentially long period of time under many adverse circumstances, including your own health. You've got the style of that piece that you have to live in while you might be doing a workshop of a completely different style during the day or on your day off. And then you've got the character, the interpretation, you've got that director's version. How many Les Mises have there been? Knowing the style, but then also having enough vocal technique to have the flexibility to do that. I think I hear sometimes in young singers today a lot of little bit of riffing or popping down from a note in Rodgers and Hammerstein. It don't work. Arts police will come and handcuff you. I'm not for that, and yet I'm for contemporizing anything, whether it's Shakespeare or opera or musicals. But I think there's also, in my opinion, a lot of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So don't change the plot too much. Just approach it from a more contemporary sensibility if you can.
Are there any roles or projects that you look back on and you're either especially proud of or elicit a certain place of honor in your memory?
I wouldn't trade a thing. I loved, my career in New York. My classical start was really, I suppose it gave me a great deal of discipline. I loved my life in Italy and my singing there. I loved getting started in musical theater. The Fantasticks was magical, and especially this year, Harvey Schmidt just having passed away, and I'm still in touch with Tom, who's in his 90s, and that was like an alma mater for me in a way in theater. Some good times on Broadway, some not good times on Broadway. I loved working at Lincoln Center. I did 2 Michael John LaChiusa shows there. I loved working at City Opera. I did Candide, and Sweeney Todd was, wow. Any Sondheim show for me has been the highlight because I love Sondheim's writing. I like his shows. That was incredibly special stuff to me, to getting inside that.
And you've also done a great bit of studio recording. I have a treasured recording of Leonard Bernstein's work that you've done with some other really fantastic performers, and another album of work that Ricky Ian Gordon.
Ricky, there was another Ricky. Ricky Gordon's stuff, I have loved singing Michael John stuff. I collaborated with Adam Gettel on Light in the Piazza.
Because you did a lot of the Italian words.
The Italian words, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's supposed to be a secret or not. He originally wrote the role of Clara for me, and I ended up never doing it, but I was really happy doing instead. I preferred to do the writing with him in the Italian. And of course, Leonard Bernstein, I left out Leonard Bernstein, but there's a person whose music I grew up with, cherishing it. If I were to say what would I like to do now to extend my life in the arts, because I don't think you ever want to give up being an artist.
No.
Just don't want to give that up. Besides decorating lampshades and feng shuiing my flat in England, what can I do that's artistic? And I think teaching and passing on, the great people that I've been lucky enough to work with, but also I love directing. I also really am a bugaboo about speech. This is my new bugaboo.
Okay.
And we haven't talked about this.
All right, let's talk.
It's my new passion, is getting people to speak correctly. And, I'm a Jersey girl. I can do a million dialects. I do dialect coaching. I've worked as, I love that. It's one of the things that I think I also would like to continue pursuing as a career, because I really love doing it, and I love it when people are true to a dialect, but at the same time making the text understandable.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people today don't speak well.
It's funny because a lot of people attribute that to technology and not having face-to-face interactions. And on a personal note, my diction has improved vastly by talking with my phone because Siri can't understand me otherwise.
That's a good point.
So I'm like...
That's an excellent point.
And I have to make sure I use open vowels and have final consonants and don't blow my words together.
You're a killer coach because you have so many facets that you bring all of that when you coach someone. Whether it's diction and comprehensibility, but you also bring the theatrical element, the storytelling. You also bring specificity of the idiom because you've got your shanties one day and then you're arranging a classical piece the next.
Well, I've learned from the best. So,
but yeah, no, diction it's important, and I say to students, look, even if you don't go into theater, you're going to have to talk on an automated phone, or you're going to have to go in for a job interview, or speak to a group, or whatever. Also, just for the virtue of it, English is a beautiful language. My mother came to America when she was 35 years old and had to learn to speak English, which was difficult back then because you didn't have Rosetta Stone and you didn't have recorded things. And she was living in a basement in Brooklyn, with a bunch of Jewish New York, Brooklyn people that talk like this. And she learned to speak English beautifully and said what a great language it was. And I always...
And that's coming from arguably the most beautiful language.
One of the absolutely most exquisite languages to the ear is indeed Italian. So that's interesting to me. I'm not a well-read person. The scholar is my husband. The wordsmith is my husband. Literature, history, he's a writer. I, however, love to speak words and love conversation where we explore how to define something with a word. So the way you speak the word, the sound of the word, and then how that goes into singing and dialects, and how dialects affect the color of the time and place that you're acting in. It's so textured and so interesting to me, but yeah, I think it's nice if people can talk well.
Yeah. Well, it's that you and Will is the difference between the creative artist and the interpretive artist. A speaker of words, a singer of music is nothing without its composer, and vice versa.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in musicals, that is a place where all those things get sewn together. You've got the most remarkable dance, the most remarkable music, text and books and lyrics, and to kind of sew it all together and bring it to a plane where it's seamless is a big challenge. Don't kid yourself out there, folks. There are so many compartments in the arts. You can talk about, I'm a rug maker. Well, what kind? Are you a weaver? Is it silk rug? Is it woolen rug? Is it tapestry? Is it hand done? Is it? There's nothing in life, now that we're global and we can reach out to some remote village in India and find out about how they weave their rugs. We realize there are millions of ways to do what we do, even in one genre. You say musical theater, what's that? So yeah, the more you know, the more you know. And
the more people get to know this one, the more they will know. It has just been such a pleasure and a gift to see you today.
Thank you,
and to spend some time with you and chat
dearly.
And share you with my audience. Can people get you as a teacher or a coach? Do you do Skype lessons, or is there a place where you're going to be doing a residency that they can sign up for classes?
Thank you. I don't have another residency scheduled, although I hope to have another one, but I do a lot of Skype teaching now because my students are literally all over the world. I teach people in Republic of Georgia, Russia, France, America, England, and plus my students go on the road, and that's when you really want to check in sometimes. Sure. So as much as I went, ooh, Skype teaching, ooh, now I'm a Skype teacher, and I do have a website, which is www.judyblazerstudio.com.
Which I will also link below.
That's Blazer with a Z, not Blazer with an S, because Blazer with an S goes there. We did that. Watch this man. Watch him.
We will see you next week on PARDO'S Turn. Thanks. Give us a like, thumbs up, comment, share. Bye.